Bom dia.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Buenos dias, senhoras e senhores. Com muito prazer que nós
It's with great pleasure that we are resuming now with our our third session of lectures, the second keynote. We had a few technical issues now because of the YouTube transmission, but
em computação, a gente está sujeito a uma série de problemas que
this happens when we deal with computers. And if it were in-person events, those would not happen. But now with the computers, those things happen. We apologize, but this won't stop our event from shining.
hoje nós teremos aqui
So today we will have here in this special keynote session, Professor Cosimo Palladiano and Professor Maria Cândida Trindade de Seabra. I will make a small introduction, beginning with Dr. Maria Cândida. She's a professor of Portuguese in the Federal University of Minas Gerais. She works on graduate and undergraduate programs. She studied communications and languages in the Federal University of Minas Gerais. She has a master's in Portuguese as well, and a PhD in linguistics by the Federal University of Minas Gerais as well. She has a postdoc by the University of São Paulo with the supervision of Professor Maria Vicentini Dick, and also a postdoc by Unicino with supervision by Professor Dr. Maria da Graça Quinca. We also have the development of linguistic research, theoretical and descriptive, in the perspective, synchronyms and diachronyms, emphasis on onomastic. She is also coordinator of Lexicography by Anne Paul. She's a leader of the Grupo Mineiro de Estudos do Léxico and a researcher of the CNPq research group on historical linguistics, studies education and toponymy, and also other work groups, and she coordinated other projects for the Minas Gerais state. She's a member of the Curators Center for the Memory of the Languages Center of the UFMG, and also director of documentation of the Institute of Minas Gerais. Professor Cosimo Palladiano is an emeritus professor of the Sapienza University of Rome in Italy. He is the chair on the part of the International Geographical Union of the Joint Commission of the International Cartographic Association in toponymy. We will begin with the presentation of Professor Cosimo Palladiano, and then we will have Professor Maria Cândida, and then we will have our Q&A session. Cosimo, you have the floor.
I try to share the screen.
Okay, now you share the screen.
Yes. But is this impossible to
enlarge your PowerPoint?
Can Anna launch my PowerPoint, because it's difficult for me.
In a minute, I will do that.
You can enlarge your screen. Yeah.
Where is screen? Where is
share screen? Yes, enlarge your micro.
It's impossible to enlarge.
It's in the square. In the square. Up. Is it up?
The square is. It's possible.
Not with me.
No.
Not possible.
In the up and your right.
No, the right.
In the square, up and the right.
No,
Please, the upper part of the screen,
yes.
right? Where you see home. Can you see home?
Home.
Written home. Then follow to the right. In the upper right-hand corner.
The corner.
Upper right-hand corner, up there,
In
you'll see a square.
I cannot see.
in your micro in PowerPoint screen.
Okay,
Look at the PowerPoint
please.
screen.
Same
Yes.
condition, yes.
The upper right-hand corner.
Right
Eu
corner.
posso tentar colocar o...
Ele tá com uma versão nova que não chegou aqui para mim.
It's possible.
Eu posso compartilhar aqui?
Sim,
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes.
Mhm.
é porque essa é uma
Oh,
versão.
yes.
Okay.
Distinguished
You
colleagues,
have the floor.
it's possible to can you hear? Can you hear?
Yeah,
Distinguished
Yes.
ladies
Sound
and
is
gentlemen,
good.
ladies and gentlemen, the current definition of a geographical map says that it's a reduced, symbolic, and approximate drawing of part of the Earth's surface. The concept of reduction and approximation are clear. The reduction is due to the impossibility of reproduction of an area that is likely to be much larger on a small scale. The approximation is due to the need to use artifices to drawing a curved surface on a plane. The reduction is solved by means of a reduction system called the scale, while the approximation is solved with a system of projection. But scale and the projection may be made, but the bow and the projection tend to limit the approximation, but they cannot be completely eliminated. The speed of a plane in flight must be calculated in relation to the Earth's curvatures. Therefore, the speed is calculated on the ground. The route of a ship or an airplane follows the ram line, which is a double curved line that crosses the virtual meridians always at the same angle. The ram line is reproduced like a right line on the maps of the Mercator's projection. The topographical maps are based on elaboration of this projection. Similarly, if I measure the distance between 2 points A and B on a map, I have to take in account that the real distance on the ground is different due to the Earth's curvature. The sample observation contests would think that the maps do speak and do not give precise information. Now, in this paper, I place myself as a defender of the geographical maps, taking into account the symbolism through which we can have very useful information on the territory. Since we have numerous documents from various periods of the past, we are able to hear what the maps want to tell us, not only about territory, but also about the relationships between cartographer, designer, client, owners, etc. In fact, the geographical map is not free from ideological contamination, often identifiable in the writings and drawings that appear above all in how they are written in the characters and the types of the print. The Ptolemaic maps preserved in the Vatican Apostolic Library a few names of places and regions, as in this example reported and studied by me of the world map of the Urbinus Graecus 82 code. I will not enter into discussion on the Ptolemaic maps, whether they date back to the time of Ptolemy or later. However, the date of the code, which is a copy of original, goes back to the 11th or 13th centuries. The Ptolemaic maps contain many place names of rivers, mountains, and peoples and regions. The latter are written in block capitals because the author wants to give them much importance. On the right side on the map, the different climates are shown. The Tabula Peutingeriana is a copy of an ancient Roman map showing the military routes of the Roman Empire in several paths, background, and difficult to read. It is an itinerarium pictum map, i.e., a painted itinerary which reports a series of information such as the routes of the Roman roads, the place names, and the distance in Roman miles between various points of interest. In the presented section, we have seen the Puglia region, then called Calabria, the Calabria region, then called the Bruttium, the Sicily region, the Balkan Peninsula with Greece and a part of Northern Africa. The names of the regions are clearly distinguished in red. The segments of the road with distances in miles, the names of the peoples of the village with the vignettes, the names of the rivers and inland waters. The names of the mountain ranges are well indicated. Colors and writing characters distinguish the different elements of the map. In medieval and modern times, the written and the drawing maps illustrate legend and event generally referring to religious beliefs. The earth map, the writing are in black ink with addition of red and gold, while seas and rivers are in blue and green. Jerusalem is drawn in the center of the circle. The map is oriented east up. The Garden of Eden is inscribed on the border. Great Britain is drawn in the northwest corner. Some details of the Hereford maps. The writing are readable. The Borgiano planisphere is rich on writings of different bodies and shots. According to the use of time, the map is oriented south up. The writings indicate geographical names, but also legend and histories. The Framauro map has the same characteristic. The map is oriented south up. This center. In this map, the division into continents is given by the Mediterranean Sea and the Don and the Nile rivers, like traditional OT maps. Some rain-strip and written maps published by Paolo and Mario Cartaro belong to the second half of the 16th century. In these maps in black, the place names are written with the same style and body. The boundaries of the regions are drawn with marked lines. In this period, some maps listed the fires for each place for fiscal reasons. The fires correspond to the number of families subject to taxation. Multiplying by 5 or 5.5, the 5 numbers, we can get the number of inhabitants. The maps of the Alexandrian Land Registry are interesting for the contribution to the maintenance of the consular roads. The place names are marked by the drawing the vignette of the villages. The approximately 400 barter color maps were collected by the presidents on the roads in the 1661. The content and style of writings in modern atlas is completely different. By the end of the 19th century, all the lands have been explored, at least in general terms. Antarctica has been recognized as a continent in itself and not as part of the great southern continent drawn in the atlas of the 16th century, such as that of Ortes in particular. But a 1912 edition of the Great Atlas of Stiller still bears description Unerforschter Gebiet, at the same time of the road Amundsen expedition to the South Pole. A better specification of the place names are in map of Asia with, a map of the United States and Canada out of the same atlas does not make a great distinction between the writings of place names, except for a few cases without distinction between them, according to population, importance, etc. The names of reliefs are not indicated. The specificity of some atlases makes it possible, a better specification of the place names are in the map of Asia with the indication of the place names according to the population in the legend. The specificity of some atlases makes it possible to distinguish the types of geographical names with the type of writing. Tourist, economic, physical, regional atlases pay greater attention to distinction of the typologies of writings. A particular type of map is that of languages, with a written indication and different colors and a table of linguistic types and subtypes. The present map shows the areas of the Papuan languages. The present present map of Sardinia shows with symbols the different attraction force of the places. The medieval nautical maps, the charts, are marked by a network of routes that started to the major direction of the cardinal points according to the compass. As we know, the magnetic needle tends to the magnetic North Pole. The dynamics concern only the names of coastal cities. Today, the nautical charts are full of writings necessary for navigation, such as the direction of the route, the eminent particularities of the coast, and the characteristics of the seabed, such as depth and lithology. The modern topographic maps are rich in not only graphic symbols, but also in colors with appropriate legend. However, the large-scale topographical map is an aseptic container of different information. Often, information is not the result of a choice, which is implemented and more can be implemented by the writings. As is obvious in the topographic maps, a certain distinction of the writing exists. For example, the names of rivers and wetlands, mountain system, places, and dispersed settlements are names with different writings. If we want the modern geographical maps inserted in the atlas speak, a database containing a large range of information, including endonyms and exonyms, should be built according to the standardization and romanization of geographic names according to the rules established by the UNGEG. Of course, I'm not talking about the paper atlas, but about a series of interactive maps that can be updated online to be consulted with a computer system. In this short note, I wanted to emphasize the importance of the writings on geographical maps, which are often linked to symbols. Religious, artistic, ideological, cultural, scientific, technological symbols form the basis of the stratification of identities. All these elements are concentrated in place names. The identities, which have been talked about a lot and well in this conference, especially by my co-chair and friend Peter Jordan, must not be conflicting. Communities, especially in these times of globalization and massive population movements, must be able to coexist peacefully with each other, exchange experience and tradition without erecting in ideal and real worlds between them. Respect is an indispensable concept of a free identity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cosimo, for your.
Thank you so much, Cosimo, for your presentation. That was very interesting.
We follow with the presentation of Maria Cândida. Maria Cândida.
Maria Cândida, you have the floor. So if you please. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see the screen? Well, good morning. I'd like to greet everyone, especially the Scientific Commission, the coordination of the symposium. It's an honor to be here, and I'd like to thank you, Professor Paulo Menezes, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be in an event that gathers so many experts and to be able to learn from them and learn about toponymy. Well, my talk will have 3 different moments. First of all, I'll talk a little bit about proper names of places, and I'll speak as a linguist, because we notice when we study toponymy, this intertextuality. So we have several theories, and I am going to expose here how we are working here in Brazil. Of course, that a lot that I'll say has to do with what's being mentioned, but there are differences. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the variation and the linguistic change, which is my area of research in my university, and then how we are working to organize documentation for historical toponymy. Well, proper names of places, I'll start working with the structure of the toponym. So we have the generic term, as was shown before in a few talks, and we have the specific term, which is the toponym itself. So the toponym is a proper element given to a generic name. So a toponym will individualize certain geographical accidents. So the group generic term plus a proper name is what we call toponymic syntagma. So we understand that proper names, they integrate a much broader field of the language, because at the same time that they broaden the meaning and give visibility to a certain geographical accident, it also makes it particular, it individualizes it. So it builds identities and awareness, because when something is named, we know that the experience is put on that name. So we have a common name in general with the generic designation, because that is used to name all of the things in a collective character. So that's an accident. So although this generic designation refers to the imaginary world, it's a consensus that not all generic designation has an individual designation. So proper names are proper names. However, this specific naming or individual naming has drawn the attention of scholars since ancient times, especially when it refers to naming people and places. So the generic term plus the specific term, as I mentioned, they are a toponymic syntagma. But as a language, we know that the languages are alive, nothing is stationary, so we can have a toponymization process. So that toponymic syntagma, which was made up of a specific term, is transformed into a toponym, like the case of Rio de Janeiro. So the place has a name. In the case that I'm bringing is Rio Vermelho, Red River. So the motivation of vermelho was because the waters were colored in mud. That's why we called it red or vermelho in Portuguese. So this toponym relative to color did not become the motivation, and the city adopted this toponymic syntagma as a name, the name of the river. So we will have a hydrotoponym. So this name is spreading. We end up having neighborhoods and shops, stores. So the name gains strength and it transforms. So this toponymization process is extremely productive in the Brazilian Portuguese language. So the onomastic studies in general, and in particular the toponomastic or toponymy, and I make a difference of those, although toponomastic and toponymy are synonyms, there is a recommendation since 2011 by the International Council of Onomastics of calling them toponomastic, the area, and toponymy, the group of data. But in Brazil, in several countries as well, both are synonyms. But it's an area that's recognized, acknowledged by historical linguistic as important means of linguistic and cultural investigation. Here, I want to make it clear that what we are considering culture is a group of ideas, predictions, knowledge, and practices, social practices projected in the language of a people. About this toponymic syntagma, we can say that the toponym connected to the generic term, to the accident, it reveals data from the people who name it, and lexical variants reflect many times the speech of these people, and they're important for us to trace dialect areas of a certain territory. And the syntagmas that are established and crystallized, they provide data to the person who studied them about the permanence of certain traces in the language. So here we can talk about Fau, Arroio, and Sacos bags, for example. Vau is a name that is crystallized. What we have marking the territory as a toponym where it exists, but it's not a name that has a vitality in our contemporary world. One other thing that we should pay attention to in terms of toponyms is, especially in a country as large as Brazil, is the matter of what that toponym wants to say. So if I have the Paraná River, Rio Paraná in Portuguese, in the south region of Brazil, I will have Paraná as a specific term because we have a state called Paraná as well. But if I go to the north of Brazil, I'm going to find Paraná as a generic term because there's no state there. So we have it as a geographical accident in the north region of Brazil, and it is a term that defines channels of rivers. It's a name that comes from the Tupi language, indigenous language. That's also a bit questionable. Navarro, in his dictionary, says that it's a term that comes from general language, from the Amazon and not Tupi, but it's a term that defines channels of rivers. So we have Paraná, Barra which is a river in the Amazon region, and we have Paraná Acará, which is a river with fish in Amazonas, Paraná Ogari, which is a plant, Paraná Oraria is also a plant, Paraná Ouro, and then we see the accident in the Tupi language and ouro in the Portuguese language. Ouro means gold in Portuguese, so it's a hybrid syntagma. We also have Paraná Macueira, that is a variant of Macura, which is an animal in the Amazon region. So at the same time that we have Paraná as a proper name in our country, we have Paraná as a generic term somewhere else.
Então, os nomes,
So names,
são realidades naturais.
they are natural realities. They are idealized realities. They are connected to the mental activity of men, and they refer to extra-linguistic realities. So they refer to entities of the nature and culture. That's why it is an intertextuality area. Proper names and toponyms, they have meanings that extrapolate the linguistic characteristics. They reflect the history, the culture, the religiosity of a certain community. For example, if I go to Rio and I talk about Estiba, I'm probably talking about a port activity. But if I go to Minas or in the countryside of the Bahia state or in Goiás, if I mention Estiba, I'm talking about a wooden bridge on an area with a lot of mud, a bridge that's made it at the ready for people to walk. So it depends on the story of the group. So intertextuality is very important. If it is important, then the toponymy needs to study these changes because toponyms have a double dimension. It's twofold. There's a spatial memory, it refers to a certain place, and it also has a toponymic memory when it names a place or when a certain name is given to a place, that place becomes a reference and the name is recorded then. There's a motivation. And so thinking about this toponymic memory, that those who work with toponymy are going to study that and look for that. But toponym is subjected to the consequences of time, to the influences, the changes, and even the disappearance of its original meaning. Because the society changes and the word gains other meanings many times. And what the toponym means, many times it escapes from the memory of people. Here in Brazil, we can think a lot about the matters of the names of saints because the names of saints not necessarily point to religiosity of people. It was very common to have a lot of São José here, and at the time of the colony, that had to do with Dom José and not a saint. But as time went by, people forgot that, and São José became a saint and referred to the saint of that city. So as a part of the language, a toponym is subjected to changes that result from hesitations and several ways of saying something. So they can be temporal, they can be regional, it depends. So just to give you an example, we have in contemporary maps of the IBGE, of our Institute of Geography and Statistics, we have the toponym Minas Novas, 3 cities in Minas Gerais, Berilo and Chapada do Norte. So going back to the past, in the 18th century, Minas Novas was called Vila do Fanado. Why? Well, because people who went looking for gold at this state of Brazil, which is called Minas Gerais, general mines in this translation, those people do not find what they were looking for. So fanado is a word in Portuguese that means that people did not find what they were looking for. They were mistaken. But then other people went back to the region and Nossa Senhora do Bom Sucesso, a saint, patron, because it was a sisterhood that a priest, Faria, brought to Ouro Preto. So at the time they said, oh, those who have that saint as a protector, they will find gold. So they went back to that place, and the place became to be called Vila do Bom Sucesso. Sucesso means success in Portuguese. And what they found then was gold. So the name changed to Minas Novas, new mines, because it's a region that's is a bit more distant to the old mines in Ouro Preto, Mariana, Sabará, other towns in Minas Gerais state who also have gold. Água suja, which is a dirty water in Portuguese. It was not a dirty water, but it was a water with mining and with a lot of mud, but no one wants to live in that place. So it remained being called Água Suja, but in the 20th century, they changed that to Água Limpa, clean water, and then to Berilo. So in the 20th century, we had two names, Berilo and Água Limpa. But as people get older, the newer generations adopt the other name, so they start to call it Berilo. Chapada it also refers to a plateau and a geographical accident, and we will have Chapada do Norte to differentiate that from other chapadas. So Dauzat, in 1926, when he studied the toponym of France, he used to say that names identified the changes of names in a certain place. So he talked about two types of changes, the spontaneous change and systematic change. So spontaneous change is this one, like dirty water to clean water, água suja to água limpa, that people themselves revisit the place and they change the name. In Europe, he's talked about invasions. But when we think about the systematic change, that happens when an authority imposes a name, and that's what we see a lot in Brazil. Many times a beautiful name had a motivation, but since the government wants to please someone or part of the society, they change the name. Example that we have is the city of Bueno Brandão in the south of Minas. Bueno Brandão was a politician. He wasn't even from the town that had his name. The name was Campo Místico before, mystical field in loose translation. It was a name given by a priest that found the place very beautiful, but now the name belongs to that politician. So this happens a lot, as in the case of names of airports and other places. So researchers studying toponyms and onomastics, they can study that in multiple ways. So thinking about toponymy in the synchronic perspective and looking at past synchronicities, having a lot of cuts to look at the work, that's something very nice. But to do research like this, we need to have documents. We need to have data, because toponymy and the research has a lot of traps. So now I go to the third part of my presentation, which has to do with documentation. So toponymic studies, especially historical ones, they require research. That's why we cannot forego information that can facilitate our access to the past. So when we talk about access to the past, the maps are the first things that we remember, but we have a very big difficulty to read those maps. Like these two that you can see, they come from Minas Gerais state. It was work done by Márcia Santos and myself, Professor Dom Gilberto Costa from UFMG. But we know that to read these ancient, these old maps is very complicated, but even more so, it's the correspondence of the date of the place that we have on those maps with contemporary maps to know if they are past versions of a certain place. So this type of research requires paleographic work, they require paleographic reading. Some of these maps were analyzed. You have the address there about the historical toponymy of Minas. So those are names that we have, and this work of comparing if that toponym corresponds to another, that was done, and now it facilitates our work. Something else that we have on maps that is very interesting for linguistics is abbreviations and acronyms. So here we have Passagem da Barra, an abbreviated term, and that's also passagem. It's a Gallicism. It's not in Portuguese form. It's closer to French, passage. In Portuguese, it would be passagem. So Regimento de Jurueca, the change of Santa Ana, Santana, which is Saint Anne. So that is interesting for the philologist and for those who work with paleography as well. So for the toponimista, these old maps are important documents for consultation since they register previous forms of the language and they allow for comparison studies that can point to changes in a certain territory. And here I'm focusing especially on those who work on toponymy, thinking about the language.
Peraí, que tá travado. Travou aqui, só um minuto.
Just a moment, my computer screen froze.
Então, em se tratando de pesquisas
So when
diacrônicas,
we talk about diachronic research, people need to study these philological studies. It's important knowledge for manuscripts and to come up with historical corpuses and to analyze the data. And so this is interesting because with old documents, we're able to discuss social aspects, historical ones, cognitive, cultural, and ideological. And for that, we need historical linguistics, we need philology, because when we get an old document and that document brings precious traces for the study of toponymy, the ideal thing would be to contextualize that document. So who wrote that document? When did that person write that document? To know if a document is autograph or opograph, if those who wrote that is the same working with that, because there are differences, especially in old times in which there were differences in orthography. And in Minas, we work with a few guiding principles for the interpretation because we want to interpret a few things. So this document here refers to, well, it comes from our House of Representatives of the municipality of Santa Bárbara do Mato Berto. So when the House of Representatives were there in 1840, so it is a document that was written by the secretary, Maximiano, but it was spoken by Manuel José Pires. So there's a different, the person dictating a letter and the other writing it. So did the person write exactly what the other said? And other precious documents, a study that we're starting to develop has to do with these addresses, these places, railroad stations. At a time when Brazil still depended a lot on railroads, we don't find this Aimorés. Instead of Minas Gerais, we have railroad, Vitória Minas. And so that road would be a reference for that municipality. Here we have another one from 1917, São José de Barra Longa. Instead of speaking of Minas State, we find Chocotó Station. And Chocotó is a Macro-G indigenous term, so Estado de Ferro Leopoldina. Those are labels, those are pieces of names that enable not only linguistics, but also anthropology, geography, historical geography, and several areas that provide tips. Because names of places, you won't name a place if you refer to a tribe from Macro-G, if that group were not there. Here we also have documents from Minas. It's a document from 1917. It's a letter to a deputy.
Era o Nelson de Sena, dizendo, eu tenho presente sua carta de
Nelson de Sena, and he asks for the change of the name of Barra Longa Station in the Fluminense network because of the place. So here we will have this history. Why did a certain name change? What was behind that? And what's also very interesting, this is another document coming from Padre Pedro Vidigal. It's a priest, and this priest was born in a city that is now called Presidente Bernardes, but used to be called Calambau, which is an indigenous name. And the city is located in a place where a river makes a curve. So Calambau means the place where something makes a curve. So he writes a letter to the director of the Museum of Inconfidência, which was very powerful. He was very powerful because he was from the church. And he said that, I'm going to Calambau to see the installation of the municipality of Presidente Bernardes. So there was a name, Calambau was changed to Presidente Bernardes. And then he says, and also he is criticizing that. He's criticizing, saying that people no longer love the past in Brazil. And flattery has its limits too. So the name was going to be changed because of the municipality, but the priest asked the parish to remain with the old name. So he says, we can write a beautiful letter talking about this. And with this letter, he proposed to put that on a newspaper at the time to say that he was not alone in this fight. And he continued, well, still with the flattery in this historical and geographic sector, not long, Mariana will be another name, Celso Porta will be another name, Ouro Preto will be João de Padre, Barbacena will be Padre José Rocha, and Rio Doce will be Dom Leovésio. He's criticizing and saying all the changes of names by names of people. And about this place, Calambau, what's interesting is that we had news in our newspapers here talking about this change, because usually there's a referendum and the young people really like Calambau. It's even interesting because at the same time there's a generation that uses to criticize a lot. A younger generation wants the name, and there's a person there, and he was mentioned in the news saying that he was born in Calambau in 1941. He was married in Presidente Bernardes in 1954. And he was the manager of a bank in 1986. And now he goes back to Presidente Bernardes. So he was Calambau, he went to Presidente Bernardes, then he went back to Calambau, and now Presidente Bernardes again, and people still can't settle this change of name. It's interesting to see in old documents too, like this one. In the same, it's not even handwritten. You have this part here saying São Sebastião da Cachoeira Alegre, and above you have Cachoeira Alegre. Of course, you're going to see a change there. You have the stamp saying one thing and the name saying another. So in this time, 1913, you can see that there already had this change. They already had this change. So documents talk a lot about toponymy. And we can work on this, and we've been doing that. In addition to separating and scanning those documents that are relative to each city of the Minas Gerais state, we're having a folder with all of those documents because the idea is to put all of that on a website. But we can see, for example, toponym Acaiaque. We will have Capela do Obá in 1770, São Gonçalo do Obá, and then Obá do Furquim, and then Acaiaca. It's interesting thinking that the name Obá is very strong in the region, and São Gonçalo is still a patron of the city, but Acaiaca was a name brought by an engineer of the city of Diamantina, Minas Gerais. So
região, porque
there
na região que havia era do tronco macrogêneo,
were indigenous from other people there, but he brought the name Akayaki that refers to a tree because the engineer thought the tree was beautiful and he wanted to take the name to the railroad station. So toponymy is full of traps and all documents help us understand those. You can see the Barra Longa, we will have documents from Barra do Gualacho do Norte, São José da Barra, but it's São José to please the king, and then Barra do Coronel Batias Barbosa, who was a person related to the Count of Linhares, and then Barra dos Gualachos, going back to the ethnical group of the region, and then Barra Longa. Another name that is not transparent is Bonito. Bonito is a municipality in that region. It's not because the place is bonito, beautiful in Portuguese. It is the surname of Francisco Lopes Bonito. So since the toponymic memory disappeared, the spatial memory is there because the name is called Bonito, but the toponymic memory disappears. So now we're left with Bonito. So to close, I could not do an etymological research of the name of a place only thinking about its current form. It's necessary to go back to the past and establish relations patiently with the various forms that preceded it until the oldest which history mentions. Of course, if we're working with an atlas, that's not possible because atlas works with contemporary data, but as we have more case studies, it's interesting to have these records. So a written record of linguistic knowledge is, of course, a relevant historical document. However, we have to acknowledge that toponyms has to do with the words and the meanings, because if there's language, we have men, and if we have men, we have stories and history, and interdisciplinarity allows us to broaden the understanding of these stories. So here I have the references that I used for my presentation and my contact information. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Maria Cândida, for your talk. That was very interesting indeed. I'd like to thank you all for the presentation, our two lecturers, Cosimo and Maria Cândida. And Cosimo presented us with a vast presentation of ancient maps and toponymy of all of that area in Europe that was represented in old maps and the tabulas and maps, Ptolemaic maps. And so that was a very interesting view, historical view of all of this representation. And also about Maria Cândida, this vast historical research that's being developed is fabulous. It's fabulous because we're going back to our history and getting back the culture and all of those elements that put toponymy as one of the views, one of the research areas that are most exciting that we can see. There is one question here for Maria Cândida. What is the meaning that we should have to investigate the toponymic investigation? I'd like to add to this question because toponymic motivation, we are very much connected to the linguistic structure. We have all of this view of the motivation, but we translate motivation as if it were a geographical motivation. And sometimes one goes against the other. So how would you see that too? Well, what I usually see is people getting the name and what it means contemporarily, and to provide a meaning to that. But the name is polysemic. It changes depending on the region. It has old meanings. So if we are working with an atlas, the orientation, even from Professor Ejik, is that you follow the current meaning. So for an atlas, there's no way to do anything different. But if we're working and if we have access to old documentation, we can build the path toward that toponym. Let me give you an example. When I was doing my PhD, there was a name of a city that was called Dom Silvério. And in older times, it used to be called Saúde, which means health. And older people there, they call Saúde and Dom Silvério, which is the name of someone. If I were to classify Saúde in the taxonomy in the contemporary world, I would classify that as an animal toponym. But Saúde, I have written records that refer to Nossa Senhora da Saúde, which was a saint. So it's the name of Nossa Senhora. And so it will depend on the focus, it will depend on the light which the researcher will use. But not everyone, especially the young people, know that saúde refers to Nossa Senhora and not to health, which is what it means in Portuguese. But if we are going to do a historical studies, then we can find what it actually was. It's a matter of method. Okay, thank you for your answer. I think that was very elucidative. Yeah, it's a search that we have to do, right? And this historical search, we're doing that for the knowledge of how that toponym was placed. It's fabulous. We see, and I'd even like to comment on this, because here in Rio de Janeiro, we have a municipality, a city that is named Varriçaia, one of them. I think everybody heard of this municipality, Varriçaia. And the meaning of this municipality, I mean, the name, it's something that, something very delicate. Saia means skirt, and varre means to sweep away. And he's saying that it was a station, and there was an inn, and the owner of this inn used to call the people, those people who went by, men, and she used to say, look, you can remain here, but afterwards, when you leave, she delivered a broom to them for them to sweep, and she used to say, varre. So you can do that and varre, and you can sweep and you can leave. Well, saia actually refers to leave, so it's sweep and leave, varre saia in Portuguese. So this is one of the stories of this toponym, one of the many tales. So if we analyze the characteristic of the toponym varre saia and sweep and leave, we want to know why varre saia, why that toponym, why did it show up? So this is a search that is very gratifying research. Yeah, I love studying the names of the railroads and the railroad stations, because people who worked in these stations, they gave names to those stations and those places, and they then disappeared, like the case of Akayaka, the name of the tree there. And that does not integrate the lexicon of the region, but it's there, and it became a toponym. And between Mariana and Ponte Nova, the railroad stations here in Minas Gerais state, all of them, as they were built, they had names of people who fought for the liberation of the state and the revolutionary people. And so you have a name called Peri dos Santos that replaced Bom Retiro, which was the original name. So people said, maybe that person, was that person born here? No, that person was not born there, but it was a name that was given to the station that became a reference for people because everybody knew the name of the station and people had to take the train. And that remained and the original name was disappeared. So that's very interesting too. It shows another view because usually people who study toponymy, they think, well, if there is a name, it's because there was that motivating element there from that place. And that's not always the case.
Exatamente. Uhum.
Exactly.
Ok.
All right.
Eu creio que a gente não tem mais perguntas.
I don't think we have any other questions.
Gostaria de agradecer
So I'd like to thank Cosimo
our speech,
for his lecture.
e Maria Cândida, muito
And
obrigado.
thank you, Maria Cândida, for your presentation.
Vamos continuando então no nosso simpósio.
And let us continue with our symposium. So thank you very much. And we're now closing this morning session with our 2 keynotes. Thank you very much and
Até a próxima.
see you very soon.
Estarei apresentando
I'll be presenting
daqui a pouco
the next one very soon
na próxima sessão oral.
in our next session. Manuel, yeah, just to remind you and invite you to say that the invitation continues now with work,
Às 10h40.
oral session number 3, and the first work will be mine. I will present at 10:40
Muito obrigado. Até lá.
a.m. Brasilia time. Thank you very much. See you soon.